Hello there. So in this talk, we're going to be looking at the poem Plaits by Elizabeth Smither. This, I think, is a great example of a poem that seems quite straightforward at the start, but if we look carefully, there's more going on here than maybe first appears. Now, in case you don't know, plaits are made by weaving strands of hair together to create a long, narrow hair design. In the US, you may call them plaits. They're sometimes called braids as well. And to give you some context, Elizabeth Smither is a New Zealand poet born in 1941 who's written lots of poetry, short stories, and some novels as well. So first up, let's have a listen to the poem, and then we can go through it in more detail. Plaits. I had two plaits, one thick, an anaconda plait, and the other more like a thin grass snake. My parting was on one side, a harvest, a rich waterfall, and a thin trickling river. But they were companionably joined and tied with a wide ribbon whose loops and bows were equal. The weak and the strong were strong together, the raised segments of hair, a wide and thin muscle. A lesson that hung down my back, so, though I could not see justice, I could feel how it was distributed. So what's your first reaction to this? Mine was that, okay, this is clearly an extended metaphor about the speaker's plaits. They're different, but that's okay because when they're joined together in a wide ribbon, they help each other. That's not a bad start, but it seems unlikely a poet is only going to be talking about their hairstyle. Perhaps the plaits represent or symbolize something else. We'll come back to this idea later. Now, the first two stanzas establish the difference between these plaits. The speaker begins, I had, so we know they're talking about some time in the past, possibly childhood. The first image is an intriguing one because they're comparing one plait to an anaconda and the other to a grass snake. And when we get unusual images like this, it's worth stopping to think why the poet has chosen them. Now, an anaconda is physically a much thicker, stronger snake, whereas a grass snake is smaller, thinner, and far less of a threat. And here's also where we see a more complex side to the poem. Smithers uses assonance or repeated vowel sounds in a very clever way. In the phrase an anaconda plait, there are many longer a sounds, actually just 5 in those 3 words. Contrastingly, the other was like a thin grass snake, which employs shorter, clipped I or I sounds. To get a bit technical, Smithers is here combining assonance with soft consonant sounds, here the letter N, and when we do that, it's called euphony. Now, you may have noticed that the anaconda is a metaphor, whereas like a thin grass snake is a simile. So there's another difference there. So why the different technique? Probably because, as you may know, metaphors are generally stronger than similes. They say something is something else, whereas similes say they are merely like another object. And this makes us feel like the first plait is especially strong and robust. And we then move on to another great example of imagery, water. And on the one side is a strong, powerful image of a cascading, wavy waterfall, not dissimilar from the image of a long, thick snake, I guess, crawling along. And calling it a harvest is a striking phrase because it makes it sound like the plait is full and healthy, maybe even blonde in colour. And again, there's assonance here used in the form of the long vowel sounds in waterfall. The second image contrasts with that as it's a thin, trickling water, lacking any real power. It's also easy to imagine what this would look like. And once more, we have assonance, this time with the short I sounds in the last 3 words of the stanza. One more technique used here is enjambment, or run-on lines. There are several examples of this, initially in the first stanza, as the snake image slides from one line to the next. And here, the line, a rich waterfall and, also works as it reflects the natural flow of the water. Now, despite all these differences, it's worth remembering that they are part of the same head. The anaconda and the tree snake, both snakes, and the waterfall and the river, obviously both forms of water. In the same way, the plaits on the speaker's head may be very different, but they share a common bond. And this makes for an interesting juxtaposition where the writer uses 2 images for a particular effect. So the plaits may not appear balanced, but they are inextricably linked. Now, the point is stressed again in the third stanza, where we learn that the plaits come together companionably. And this unusual adverb uses personification to show that they were compatible despite their differences, and that the wide ribbon that brings them together is vital, makes them united, and therefore stronger. So here we move away from all of those contrasts we had earlier, and there's more a sense of working together through words like joined, tied, and equal. Smithers' use of vowels is again worth looking at here. Let's look at the phrase with a wide ribbon whose loops and bows were equal. Long vowel sounds dominate in the words whose loops and bows. And we feel like we're back with euphony, as this is quite melodic. When the two plats join, though, we're told that they're equal. Now, this word sounds very different. There's a shorter E sound to start with, and then a hard K, equal. The word, therefore, stands out from the rest, and again, this is deliberate. We may be surprised to learn that these plats are equal once joined together. The phrase wide and thin muscle at first seems a bit contradictory until we realise one is supporting the other, and describing it as a muscle has obvious connotations of strength. This brings us to the central theme of this poem. Once together, they work as a wide and thin muscle, which reminds us of the snake and water imagery from earlier, but also tells us that they're both stronger together than they are apart. And then in the final stanza, the tone is a lot more reflective. The plat is now described as a lesson, a much less physical comparison than before, but a really important metaphor. Because the plat is behind her physically, Smithers can't see it. She can't see the justice of it, but could feel that the plat was evenly balanced or distributed, and therefore justice was done to all of her hair. Now, of course, talking about justice strongly suggests a wider theme. We also can't see justice, but we can sense when it's being delivered, or, to borrow from the last word of the poem, distributed. This suggests unity and fairness coming from working together, whatever our differences may be. Is Smithers hinting at one particular kind of justice? It's not clear, but she is from New Zealand, so maybe talking about the Maori people and the land that was taken from them by settlers. But it's also possible that this refers to a more general idea of justice. Now, let's have a quick look at the structure of the poem. Now, the poem is written in free verse with no rhyme scheme or clear rhythm. However, there's sort of a lot going on that we can talk about. Check out all that enjambment as one line flows into the next, giving it a very natural feel, similar to how hair needs to flow and intertwine to create a plait. And the rhythm also may not be regular, but neither are the strands of hair she weaves together, and they end up perfectly fine. As you can see, there's no real rhyme scheme here, which is typical of Smithers' poetry. But in the third stanza, she does say the hair was tied with a wide ribbon. It's an internal rhyme there, tied and wide, and helps draw our attention to those words, which are important. Tied especially as it links to maybe family ties and strength. Now remember how the I sounds, the short I sounds, were clipped, and the thin river. Now that the plats are joined together, Smither uses much longer I sounds in tied and wide to reflect how much better they are when they're united. Now, one unusual feature here is the lack of punctuation or capital letters, you may have noticed. I think this is done to build on, again, that natural flow of words that comes all the way through the poem. And those three-line stanzas, known as tercets, look quite solid and work well together. Why 3 lines? Why 3 of them? Well, how many lines of hair do you need to form a plait? Exactly, 3. So there we have it, a lovely poem with quite a strong message. Hope you found that analysis useful. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe.